I think FDA taking a stronger stance on, whether it's decentralized trials, which we have seen recently on AI. So I think they're moving in the right direction, but I think a stronger stance and to really help pharmaceutical companies run quickly and providing them with some more clear steering guidance, I think would be beneficial.
Hello, and welcome to episode 5 of FDA Watch. I'm Wayne Pines. I've been involved with FDA for many decades. At one point, I was Associate Commissioner at FDA, and I've authored or edited 16 books about the agency.
Thanks, Wayne. And I'm Shelly Garg. I'm the managing partner and founder of Garg Law, a full-service FDA-focused law firm. I have been on the private side supporting companies on FDA regulatory compliance and enforcement issues for the last 15 years.
Here's what to expect from FDA Watch. We'll have at least 2 episodes a month. We're independent. We're nonpartisan. We'll be a national forum for discussing the latest developments, trends, and issues in 4 core areas: pharmaceuticals and biologics, medical devices and diagnostics, food and dietary supplements, and cosmetics and personal care products.
We'll also be discussing the overall direction of the agency, including what to expect from the new administration and what's going on with AI at the FDA. If you subscribe, you'll also get bonus episodes when there's breaking news. And as we've seen, there's always quite a bit of breaking news, right, Wayne?
Absolutely. Right now, we're in a transitional period for FDA, and we will be discussing that quite a bit in our podcast and keeping our listeners up to date on what's going on as we go through this transition. In this episode, we're going to focus on pharmaceutical issues, specifically clinical trials. And our guest will help us discuss this very important topic, and you'll meet him in just a moment. But first, let's get to some headlines. From the Pharma desk, FDA is going to hold a virtual public workshop on cell therapies and tissue-based products. The event is a workshop that's designed to generate scientific evidence to facilitate the development of cell therapies and tissue-based products. The purpose of the workshop is to discuss the current state of the science for development and testing of certain cellular therapies and tissue-based products. As consumers and as potential patients, there's nothing more exciting than to see what's going on in the development of cell therapies and tissue-based products. Details of the virtual workshop are on the FDA website. From the devices desk, FDA has issued a 2024 annual report from the Center for Devices and Radiological Health, CDRH. The report illustrates the way that CDRH continues to advance safe, effective, and high-quality medical devices and safe radiation-emitting products. CDRH took significant actions to protect and promote the public health and improve device safety, while at the same time fostering the development of medical devices that address unmet needs and provide a significant benefit to patients in this country. You will be able to access the annual report again on the FDA website. That's fda.gov.
Thanks, Wayne. From the Foods Desk, FDA publishes a new food contamination prevention strategy. So the prevention strategy is aimed at combating the contamination of fresh and frozen berries with enteric viruses such as hepatitis A virus and norovirus. The strategy outlines a series of actions designed to enhance communication, implement consistent prevention measures globally, and fill significant research gaps in the detection and management of these enteric viruses. As we know, this particular industry has really been a source of foodborne illness outbreaks over the years. And so it's really interesting to see kind of the development and shaping of the strategy to prevent, hopefully, this, ongoing widespread issues, including recalls. From the cosmetics desk, FDA's plan to ban certain hair straightening chemicals remains in limbo. Under the Biden administration, FDA had planned to propose banning formaldehyde and certain formaldehyde releasing chemicals from being used in hair straightening products. That plan, however, remains in limbo under President Trump. Due to concerns about these chemicals and their links to cancer risks, the FDA under the Biden administration considered proposing a ban on these ingredients in certain cosmetic products, such as chemical hair relaxers and pressing products, which are disproportionately advertised to Black women. Now, Wayne, let's meet our guests.
Yeah, our guest today is Anthony Brogno. Anthony is the Director of Clinical Operations with Lindus Health. He leads all US-based trials and running them radically faster for life science pioneers. His 18 years of industry experience spans across sponsors, CROs, sites, and industry consortia. Welcome to FDA Watch, Anthony.
Thank you, Wayne. Thank you, Shelly. Glad to be here.
Well, there's a lot to discuss when it comes to clinical trials. I want to start by noting that two of the most important thought leaders in clinical trials no longer are with the agency. Last year, Janet Woodcock left her position as the director of the Center for Drugs, and Bob Temple, who had been with FDA for 52 years and who, in a sense, is the godfather of the clinical, trial, retired, and they are no longer with the agency. So their absence is very important. Both Janet and Bob really spent a lot of their time talking with sponsors about clinical trial design, the interpretation of clinical trials, and their counsel was heavily relied on by a lot of the medical reviewers. I just felt that as we're talking about clinical trials, we needed to note the loss of these two really, really important people. Anthony, drug development and drug approvals will be a priority area for the new FDA team coming. Even if there weren't a change of administration, there's so many things that are happening in this area. You've been involved in this area for a long time. What's your perspective on how the design and conduct of clinical trials has evolved?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, just back to your point previously about Bob and Janet, leaving the FDA. Anytime you lose people of that experience and that their tenure, you're bound to lose some of that institutional knowledge that's been there. Loss of some of their regulatory expertise, and some of the relationships that they have formed. So we'll see how the future holds. Still hopeful and positive, but we've seen a lot, I think, out of FDA over the past few years. Maybe just from my perspective, beginning with COVID and this new way of running clinical trials differently, more quickly, and different natures, such as leveraging local healthcare providers and more of the decentralized approaches to research. And now it seems like AI is the hot buzzword and topic of conversation. And so I think we have exciting times ahead of us with the use of these decentralized approaches, the use of AI, and really just the broadening of practices and how we can really bring drugs, pharmaceuticals, and technology to participants more quickly.
Thanks, Anthony. As you know, the commissioner nominee is Dr. Marty Makary. He's a practicing surgeon and has published on clinical trials. Anthony, if you had his ear, what do you think his major focus should be when he looks at FDA's role in the clinical trial landscape?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think I think there's it's perceived by many small biotechs, large pharmaceuticals. There's a lot of red tape when working with any regulator, and rightfully so, right? It's a heavily regulated environment. We want to make sure that the drugs that are getting to participants and patients who need them the drugs are safe and the devices are safe. However, I think that the pendulum has swung so far in the one direction that it makes it really challenging and time sensitive or timely that it takes to get drugs to market more quickly. So I think looking at protocol development, in my opinion, is one of the areas where I think we could do a better job. I think designing protocols in an adaptive nature, kind of leading with that adaptive nature design, being able to shift quickly when endpoint or study data has been met, being able to call it a success and move on quickly. I think the current way of protocol authoring, um, setting up a study, making sure it meets its endpoints, running it to its exhaustive point where you've enrolled all your participants.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a bit labor intensive, and we're not seeing the return on it. So I think a more of adaptive protocol design, being able to pivot quickly so that we can gain approvals more quickly. I think ultimately, to answer your question, how can we get drugs to market more quickly and remove some of the red tape that's currently there?
Do you think that FDA has been on top of what you are just recommending? Again, as Shelley asked, if you had Dr. Makari's ear, what would you tell him that the FDA should be doing in this area?
Yeah, I think when working with a lot of pharmaceutical companies in the industry, and their stance when it comes to working with the FDA. Big Pharma is waiting for FDA to make a move. FDA is waiting for Big Pharma to come forward with some type of guidance. And so it's like we're at this high school dance, and we're waiting for the other person to make the first move. So I would really like to see FDA take the lead and really provide some more strategic steer and guidance to industry partners. And sponsors. I think sponsors are willing to take some of the risks and be creative, but I think they are always attuned to what the FDA is going to think or feel about that. So I think FDA taking a stronger stance on whether it's decentralized trials, which we have seen recently, on AI, which we have seen recently. So I think they're moving in the right direction, but I think a stronger stance and to really help pharmaceutical companies run quickly and providing them with some more clear steering guidance, I think would be beneficial.
Anthony, we've talked about the role of AI in clinical trial design and conduct. Can you talk about how you see AI's role moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, there's many areas you could take this question into. I think selfishly, from an operations perspective, I think I might talk about protocol design specifically. Um, Optimizing inclusion exclusion criteria, I think is probably number one on my mind. At anytime tasked with working with a sponsor and writing a protocol, there's a lot of debate, a lot of time spent back and forth. What is the ideal eligibility criteria for this patient population? What are the endpoints that we should be looking at? Um, what is the sample size, an efficient sample size calculation that we should consider? So I think anything around protocol optimization would be ideal. I think it would just help sponsors, and again, using AI data to take a look at historical studies, similar studies run in this space with around similar drugs or drug classifications or devices, um, to really help get a starting point as to what has been done in the past, what are the results have been. I just think that this could save a ton of time up front for those in the ClinOps teams at sponsor organizations or CRO organizations, with getting that first draft protocol. And I think if it's something that will be shared with the FDA, might have quicker turnaround times and approvals if knowing that, hey, the starting point for this was maybe the use of AI.
How do you see FDA using AI in reviewing clinical trials and in making determinations about the safety and effectiveness of drugs and devices?
Yeah, I think definitely using AI to sit on top of the data that's being collected across sites, to perform that continuous monitoring of safety signals. I think the automated detection of any data quality issues and early identification potentially of efficacy trends that could inform, as I mentioned earlier, that adaptive design. So I do think that AI can be layered on top of the data set to really help provide those early signals. Could ultimately save lives, could increase the speed in which a drug is approved and sent to market. So I certainly think there's a lot that can be done there, with AI sitting on top of the data from a central and continuous monitoring standpoint.
Yeah, we heard the previous commissioner, Dr. Califf, said that the adoption by FDA of AI was among the broadest challenges facing the agency. And I do want to mention the fact that it's going to take money on the part of FDA to use AI techniques in this current environment. We'll see how much money they have and whether there are changes in the FDA budget. But it does become a budget issue, and budget issues in the immediate future and in the far future for FDA are very important. I'm on the executive committee of the Alliance for a Stronger FDA, which I helped found. And we, speaking as an alliance member, we're very concerned to make sure that FDA has adequate funding to be able to keep up with all of the technology. So this is something I think that we all have to be alert to. Certainly, the industry is going to be using AI more, and the regulators have got to be able to keep up with them.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with that. And yeah, we have seen FDA allocate budget, I think, again, around 2024 to AI. And so, yes, continuing to look forward to their engagement and involvement with other regulators and the industry.
Yeah, and you mentioned before the need to have industry leadership in this area. And, AI obviously has a lot of novelty associated with it, and we're just at the beginning of using it on a broader scale. And so this is an area in which we do need to have leadership from both FDA as well as the industry, and an awful lot of collaboration between the two. We're now joined by another guest on our podcast, Steve Grossman. Steve just retired, left as the executive director of the Alliance for a Stronger FDA. He's still very, very much involved with FDA matters. And when I say that, that's because that's the name of his publication, FDAmatters.com, and really has provided some great insights into what's going on at the agency. So in addition to all of you who are listening to this, to subscribe to FDAWatch.net, which is our subscription address. FDAmatters.com is Steve's. So let me ask Steve a few questions, and then I think we'll take a little bit of a break, and then we will come back to interviewing Anthony as well. Steve, you've been involved with clinical trials for a long time. Just to mention your background, you were, of course, HHS for a long time and worked on Capitol Hill on the budget. What's your perspective on how clinical trials have evolved over the many years in which you've been associated with them?
Thank you. I'm going to go back even further than I myself go, because I think that it's important to have the context. And it just isn't so many years ago that clinical trial design was something very narrow and aimed at safety. And so here's my kind of quick overview of the evolution. It really starts in 1962 with the FDA amendments, which added the efficacy requirement and thereby changed completely what was expected. It's the same era as Francis Kelsey, so we know that the FDA came naturally by its very highly conservative view of what should be allowed on the market. And then I also usually mention this is the time of Medicare, and people sometimes ask me, well, why weren't drugs covered in the original Medicare? And the answer, which is important to answering your question, is because in 1966, drugs didn't matter that much. They really were not a part of therapy the way they are today, by any means. Skipping forward, the industry had a terrible 1970s. They never quite got the hang of the Kefauver amendments of 1962. The agency itself was trying to figure out what it meant to require efficacy. And you start in the 1980s with a series of events that eventually ignite the market, stimulate clinical trial design, create eventually a new attitude at FDA. So you have biotech, which technically is 76, 77, but in fact had no real impact until the early 80s. You have the Orphan Drug Act, you have Hatch-Waxman, all of which are saying we need something more, and we're willing to look at what rules are required to get more from in the way of pharmaceuticals that work, that help people. In the 90s, you have AIDS, which played a critical role in the development of accelerated approval and the whole rethinking of the patient role. You have PDUFA in the 90s, which gave FDA the money over time to build up a knowledgeable and hold an educated, committed staff. The Medicare drug benefit doesn't come along until 2003, but that stimulates things. Important milestone is 2012 with patient-focused drug development. We start to see Bayesian statistics coming in. And then, of course, we have COVID. And over that period of time, FDA went from being not quite sure what they wanted, but not finding anybody who was giving them good answers. And slowly, with incentives to industry, with additional monies finally to the FDA, you start to see that changing. In the 80s, FDA was still extremely conservative, had a very straitjacketed view of what it took to prove efficacy in particular. The AIDS crisis changed that. And Wayne, you and I probably have some of the same memories of protests outside of the FDA headquarters, and activism became something new, focused on drug development, which activism hadn't before that, and with a more knowledgeable group of people than had been active and organized before. And what you see with that is the openness to accelerated approval, which Dave Kessler was able to get moving. And so each of these increments over time has emboldened the agency to be a little more open to what's possible. But even as the mid-2000s, there certainly were times. I remember a client who had a crossover control study, and FDA just wasn't interested, no matter how elegant the design had been. Natural history studies were still not very of much interest to the agency in 2010. And so what you see over time is, and patient-focused drug development, you can't underestimate that. I mean, I wasn't part of that debate. When I first heard about it, my reaction was, well, what do patients know about clinical trial design? And the answer, as I came to understand, was, well, if the problem is, if patients see headaches as the main problem and your clinical trials built upon relief of stomach ailments, then you haven't found out whether or not it's working for patients. And that made a significant difference. So over time, the FDA both became more emboldened. It had leadership like Bob Temple, like Janet Woodcock, with a lot of vision. And I think if you had Janet and probably Bob as well on the line now, they would tell you it was a long process to convince people to give a little bit, a little more. The problem of orphan drugs is still, now that cell gene therapy, we finally have the agency talking about N of 1 studies. But this is all stuff that had its history, and 15, 20 years ago were just not on the table. And now I think we have the whole new evolution with the potential being realized of remote trials. So that's kind of, it's a step-by-step over the years. There were a lot of external forces combined with internal visionaries at the agency who turned things around. But people who are only looking at trials now really have no sense of, I think, of how far we've come.
Let's look to the future. That was an excellent overview of where we've been. let's look to the future. I asked Anthony this question before, but let me ask you the same, because I think it's fair to say that you know more about the FDA budget than just about anybody outside of the people at FDA who handle their budget, and you may know more than they do. And the question revolves around AI. It's going to take money for FDA to adapt to using AI and to work with companies to encourage them to use AI and for them to regulate specifically, medical devices that use AI. It's a budget question. Does FDA have the budget to really do what they need to do with AI? And I know that we're in a very uncertain time with regard to the budget, but I'm going to ask you not only a general question, but also ask you to sort of look into your crystal ball here.
Okay, well, I think I'd like to sort of think of this in two parts. One of which is companies with FDA encouragement incorporating AI in trial designs and in analysis. I think that battle's been won from the point of view of, is it relevant? Does it make a difference? Does it solve the problem? Does it get you to results that people can decide represent efficacy and safety or don't? The problem for that part of the problem is just whether or not we're going to be able to sustain the staffing levels. And as you say, this is a difficult time right now with a lot of uncertainty. But FDA can't do that part of the problem without the staff, and that's where the money. It's not so much in the substance or in the attitude towards it. There's a separate problem that gets less attention, which is that AI has incredible potential to make regulatory decision making better. And I don't know that the FDA has the staff, and I certainly know it doesn't have any budget set aside for the regulatory science reforms that would be necessary to get better decisions, more informed decisions, and also leave a different track record so that everybody knows what was decided. This is something Janet talks a lot about, a knowledge management system. Well, AI makes that possible, but the investment is significant, and it's not just a function of staff. It's also a function of budget, because this is not what Congress is thinking about right now.
Let me ask a question of Anthony. You addressed Anthony. You addressed a few minutes ago the fact that during COVID there was a change in the way the clinical trials are conducted. Subjects had the opportunity to do more from home. Do you think that this is a trend, or are we going to revert back to basing clinical trials a lot around clinic visits? And I'll ask that of you and also then of Steve.
Yeah. No, thanks for the question. I think it's an interesting question. I think that we saw during COVID a lot of these new vendors out there, CROs, tech providers that enabled decentralized trials really took off. And then after kind of we came out of COVID, you started to see companies go back to the traditional ways of running trials. Not entirely, but you started to see it. But I think, there are many challenges with running a trial decentralized or in a hybrid fashion. And, and if it comes down to what do the patients want? Does a patient want a nurse in their home? Does a patient want to have drug delivered to their doorstep? So do they want to use their home like an office or clinic setting? To some, that might sound great, and to some that might not. Some might want to go and travel into a facility and meet with their doctor. So I think we're going to see decentralized trials continue to be used. I think when it makes sense, when the risk is low, when maybe the assessments that are required as part of the protocol are not extremely invasive, maybe, and can be done and lend itself well to being done at the home. I think we're going to see sponsors willing to take a risk from their standpoint, and running it decentralized. If you've never done it, sure, it can be intimidating. But I've been a part of many decentralized clinical trials where we've had to send nurses into the home, ship drug direct to patient, capture endpoint data, in the home with the patient. So there are certainly many challenges that come along with it. I think that overall it is too attractive of a solution to completely ignore in the future. I think there are many benefits of it, but it's not a one size fits all. So it has to be the right protocol, the right therapeutic area, the right patient population, just the right amount of risk, and having the right providers too, ones who have done this before, to give you that confidence, and really making sure that your protocol is built for the DCT from the beginning.
Steve, anything to add to that?
I think that's a great answer, and the only place I think that decentralized hybrid trials, yes, but I think increasing emphasis on decentralization is critical to getting the populations that are needed. It just doesn't work for large swaths of the population, especially when you get into rare diseases, N of one. You just cannot get people in often enough to meet your points. Another advantage of decentralized is if you're doing fairly constant monitoring, if somebody is being discouraged in the trial, you're likely to know quickly and can intervene. Whereas if you're only seeing them every month, they could well be 3 weeks and deciding they don't want to do it any longer, and beyond having a real discussion about whether they should continue.
Thanks, Stephen. We're going to take a quick break right now, but please don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
And we're back. We're talking about clinical trials with Anthony Brogno and Steve Grossman.
Let's start with you this time around, Anthony. Anthony, what are the biggest questions that your customers have about working with the FDA in the clinical trial area?
Yep, no, that's a great question. And we work with many types of customers, some large pharma, some small biotechs, and the main questions that we see from our customers is, when to engage FDA, when's too soon, when's soon not soon enough. FDA provided some feedback on our protocol. We don't necessarily agree. Can we push back? And so it really comes around how, when to interact with the FDA, how to interact, when is it appropriate to maybe push back on some guidance. An example of this is sharing a protocol with the FDA. They wanted participants to have a physical exam done as part of the screening visit. And the challenge that this would potentially cause for enrollment for the study, we had, politely had pushed back and said, well, how about medical records from the last 12 months showing physical exam details? Would that suffice? Do we really need to bring participants in for physical exam at screening? And they agreed that no, medical records would suffice as long as those records were obtained within the last year and showed the full physical exam. So I think it's helping sponsors understand the meeting cadence of when you want to engage with the FDA, and the types of questions you want to pose to them. And in my experience, the FDA doesn't necessarily like to give direct or even guidance per se, or like a direct guidance on a question, but more or less a general concepts or general ideas, right? I think sponsors want the answers, and I don't know, FDA in my experience has been less about the answers and more about general guidance, oversight, and kind of pushing back to the sponsors to make the decision, rightfully so.
Steve, you've been on the board of the National Organization for Rare Disorders, and you've been involved in orphan drug development for many years. You've also been involved with cell and gene therapy. All of these products involve small patient populations. FDA has really, I think, done a reasonably good job in addressing that. Certainly, Janet Woodcock was on top of that. Do you think that you agree that FDA is addressing those concerns? And as we move forward with what we call the N of 1 study, uh, how do you think FDA needs to react to that? And are they going to be on top of that?
Well, the answer is probably. And here's my view of it. I was not trained as a statistician, so I learned it on the job. And it was a while before I realized that 0.05 meant nothing more than 19 out of 20 times it wasn't by chance. And in fact, that was rigidly enforced for many years. And uh, slowly, Frank Sosnowski documented this in 2010. FDA started to become more open to different ways of looking at things. And I think that evolves when you start to get into small trials. You just can't get the p-value that traditionally is required. And you have to think through somewhat independently about what constitutes sufficient evidence without being able to go back to some nice, neat number. And even that nice, neat number that we lived by for so many years and which is still pretty sacred at the agency, there is nothing really sacred. It's just 19 out of 20 times. And so I see FDA open to those changes. I think they fully appreciate the need for it in the case of small trials. But the what instead question still looms large, and progress is being made. But I don't think there's any, okay, here is the statistics of small trials, and here is guidance that tells you exactly which boxes you need to check off. And we're comfortable 5 years from now if you give us the results of what we asked for today. That's a work in progress.
And I think it will continue to be a work in progress because anybody who has tried to write a guidance on some of these issues knows how challenging it is to come up with general rules that will really provide the guidance and that won't be misconstrued by those who are seeking the guidance or even misused by them. Anthony, one final question. It's a crystal ball question. What is the most impactful change the clinical trial industry will make in the next 5 years?
Oh well, no pressure here. I think it's a great question. I would be very interested to see where AI is 5 years from now. How efficient, how much faster are we able to run studies? How more quickly we can, um, end studies prematurely if we're not seeing the return or the outcomes as expected. Um, and more adaptive trials, I think, should be the norm. I know I led with that earlier on in this discussion, but if the industry can find a way to have adaptive trials be the norm and the standard to help us move more quickly, I would love to see that as well, um, layered on top of the AI. Yeah, I think AI use is going to be huge. It's such an unknown, and just in my time, I've in the industry, have never been a part of something like this from an AI perspective, where you have this great commodity, this tool that can be game changing, but just no one's quite sure how and when and what is all out there. I think the span of AI is tremendous, and um, so I think like anything else, and like the industry will take a cautiously optimistic approach, rightfully so, but hopefully not dragging out over the next 100 years, and hopefully we can figure out a way to use it to our benefit over the next 5 to 10 years.
Steve, same question. You get the last word. What does the future have in store for how clinical trials are designed and conducted?
I think that the industry and this would be the contract research organizations, every aspect of the industry is going to need to adjust to the problems become more complex and the FDA staff to address them is not going to grow and may even potentially shrink. And so one of the key questions for the future is, how do we build systems outside the agency that take up the slack and provides FDA with adequate certainty that had they been involved, that they would have come to the same decision. I think that's a challenge. It's going to affect everything and everybody, because the agency, I'd love to see it grow further. The need is there, but it's unlikely. And so that's the challenge to industry working with FDA. What more can we do on the outside so that you can make the decision inside?
Thank you. Now we're going to turn briefly to our resource link segment. We provide you with some valuable links that you might want to check out. So, Shelly, let's share them with our audience right now.
Will do, but I want to first point out that these links will be included on our website, fdawatch.net. So no need to write anything down.
Let's first look at our Pharma resource link. Interesting situation. Stat reported that FDA cited an Indian ingredient supplier for deleting records. The company's based in Bangalore, and it reportedly had files that were deleted and I use this as a quote from the Stat article, to avoid unwanted conversations with FDA inspectors. That was contained in a mid-January warning letter sent by FDA to the company. As we move into a more complex, perhaps, environment at the FDA, and as international issues arise, we're going to have to be especially alert to how companies that are making products overseas are reacting to FDA. In terms of medical devices, an FDA news release alerted patients about a safety concern regarding diabetes devices such as continuous glucose monitors and insulin pumps that rely on a smartphone to deliver critical safety alerts. Users sent reports that these alerts were not being delivered or were not being heard. In cases where the users thought they had configured the alert to be delivered, they were not heard. In some cases, missing these alerts may have contributed to serious harm, including low or high blood sugar, diabetic ketoacidosis, and death. The FDA safety communication is linked on our fdawatch.net site, and it's well worth looking at for the reasons which I just explained.
Thanks, Wayne. The food link is from USA Today. FDA recalled over 2 million baked goods over concerns of listeria contamination, including a variety of donuts. This recall comes a little over a week after FDA labeled broccoli sold in Walmart across 20 states as deadly. There was also a major recall of canned tuna. We mentioned these recalls because we've seen in recent months a number of food recalls, and all of us as consumers need to remain alert and provide the resources from FDA to monitor the food supply and really work towards, of course, a safer food supply. Finally, the cosmetic resource link. It's from CNN. CNN Health published a story in February noting that an FDA proposed ban on hair straightening products containing formaldehyde and other formaldehyde releasing chemicals such as methylene or glycol remains in limbo under the Trump administration. FDA first proposed the ban in October 2023, but no official action was ever taken under the Biden administration. Formaldehyde is a known carcinogen, and sources in the CNN Health article are not confident that the ban will become a priority for the Trump administration. Furthermore, the article noted about 50% of products advertised to Black women contain these types of chemicals, compared with about 7% that are advertised to white women, according to the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health. These include products that can be used at home or in salons. And on that note, Wayne, it's time to thank Steve and Anthony for being really incredible guests on this episode. We'd also like to thank our podcast creator and executive producer, Michael Levin Epstein, and our assistant producer, Sam Hoffmeister.
And Shelly, this is important. If any of our subscribers want to suggest or be a guest on our show, or want to be a marketing partner or a sponsor, or just comment on the show, you can contact us at info at fdawatch.net. That's info, info, at fdawatch.net. And definitely check out our website, fdawatch.net, fdawatch.net. Finally, we'd appreciate if you're so inclined to give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. It really does make a difference. And remember to follow us and subscribe, and to have all your friends and neighbors and everybody you know subscribe. That's the only way to make sure that you won't miss a single episode of FDA Watch. And these are especially times when things are moving so fast, and we're going to keep you informed on FDA Watch about those moving events.
And as we say at the end of every episode of FDA Watch, if you really want to watch what FDA is doing, listen to FDA Watch.